So I'd like to talk about feeling, where we start feeling the doership, because it's actually an energy that's contained in the body. All of these beliefs in personal doership, we might think that they're contained in the head, beliefs in personal doership. Actually, they're contained in energies that are locked away in the body, or at least, let me make it clear, from one perspective, they just arise in the present moment. The body arises in the present moment, and there's nothing in the body. It's part of the experience. And from another perspective, where we treat the experience as if it's an objective reality, then certain things seem to come from a certain place. Like thoughts seem to come from the brain. So we can look at life as a spontaneous arising, where cause and effect is not how things work, and so we stop talking about life as being cause and effect. An example of that is, we wouldn't say that thoughts come from your genes and up-to-date conditioning. We wouldn't say thoughts are a product of the brain, which is a biological instrument. We would be present with what is. And when we're present with what is, we can't find a brain. We can't find genes and up-to-date conditioning. There's just this present moment. There's the image of a body, an object, and then there might be this sound objects. And we can't even confirm that the sound comes from the body. It just simultaneously arises as part of the one experience. There are the sound objects, the sight objects. The body is one of the sight objects, touch objects, and part of the body experience is touch, part is sight. And everything is arising simultaneously out of nothing, subsiding back into nothing, and in the next moment a new experience arises, which is designed in such a way to make this experience seem like it's time-bound, continuous in time and space. And the teaching, as we're approaching it today, is following the description of life being a story of time and space, a story of cause and effect, a story that A leads to B leads to C in appearance. And so we can talk about these energies being contained in the body. That's what appears to be the case from the experience point of view. And those energies that are in the body were locked away when events happened in what we assume is the past. And once again, from the present moment, there is no past. There's just this. But we're looking at it as if it's a story of time. So events happened in the past. Those events were very painful. And because the belief in doership, meaning the doer identity, existed at that time, what related to the pain in the moment was the belief in doership that took it very personally and felt that that was an attack on this identity. So let's say there was a sense, as a child, we were abandoned for a day. Our parents forgot to pick us up. And there could be a lot of pain in that situation. And then the doer of the child, which you can start to see that their beliefs, which they didn't necessarily have control over, are not necessarily that accurate. And the belief could be, I've been left alone because I've been bad, or I'm not good enough, I'm not loved. And on top of the pain of the situation, there's this load of suffering, this uncomfortableness, this fear, this psychological energy, all based on an interpretation of the situation that is not particularly accurate, and at its core is doership, where I'm not good enough, or my parents are not good enough, the way that this situation turned out, and a feeling of not being loved, a feeling of not getting pleasure in the moment. and feeling like that pleasure that wasn't delivered in the moment is an attack on who I am. So classical doer identity in a fairly extreme form, because the circumstance could be very scary and fearful to the child. And that situation is so uncomfortable in the moment that the body figures out a way of dealing with the situation the best it can. And because we don't have the intellect to see it for what it is, and it feels so uncomfortable, suppressing it is one of the ways it gets dealt with. So it doesn't get fully processed. The situation doesn't start as nothing, come up, and then end as nothing. It starts as nothing, it comes up, it gets related to a certain way, and stops there. The energy doesn't get transmuted back into nothing. And that becomes my belief of who I am. It doesn't become it. It adds to the existing idea of who I am, and gets locked in the body. And so that adds to our up-to-date conditioning, the part of the up-to-date conditioning that we could call our psychological conditioning, or the thinking mind, becomes part of the idea that I am the doer, the other is the doer, and my happiness is to be found in outcomes. And so the identity gets a little stronger. And then another event happens at another point in time, painful, and that same identity relates, the identity that has been growing essentially through life because of past events, then relates to the situation in the same way, on the same principle, and feels uncomfortable, feels blame, feels hatred, feels like attachment to life. And it's uncomfortable, the core of that feeling is uncomfortableness, and so the body figures out another way of suppressing it or distracting itself. And eventually the identity has become fairly well established. And as we go through life, it just gets more and more established. And at some point, life stops adding to that identity and starts the process of emptying that identity, dissolving essentially the beliefs in doership and attachment to outcome. The dissolving the idea of who I am that is inaccurate. And it can start dissolving that by us having this intellectual understanding. But at some point, the intellectual understanding starts going deeper and deeper and deeper and uprooting the false beliefs. Now, when we hear that and we just assume that the beliefs are in the head, we think it's all in here. New conditioning comes in and it dissolves the beliefs in the head. To some extent, yes, that is happening, but another place where these beliefs are held is in the body, in these energies. And so as the understanding goes deeper and deeper, and awareness starts landing on the uncomfortableness and starts to be able to feel it and realize, oh wow, this is guilt in my body, or this is blame in my body. And then as it starts to see the stories at the bottom of that guilt and blame, then it will say, wow, look at that story of doership and attachment to love and taking life personally. And the more that is seen, the more we see the dynamic of doership as it exists in our particular case. And as it's seen and these emotions are felt, they can start transmuting, they can start leaving the body. And as they leave the body, we tend to start finding ourselves much lighter, because that heavy, dense energy, which is a false idea of who we are, starts to not be there anymore. So the question is, how do we feel this? And once again, this isn't an instruction to the doer to do this. This is a description of the dynamics that can play out in life, and to the extent that this description becomes part of our up-to-date conditioning, then the up-to-date conditioning may allow this process instead of getting in the way of this process. Our up-to-date conditioning might encourage, might do something, or not do something, but might function in a certain way, whereas previously it functioned in a way that blocked what I'm talking about from happening. So the whole discussion here is simply a discussion that puts light on this dynamic and how it can be helpful. Now, ordinarily, the feeling of these ingrained emotions is very uncomfortable. So what happened historically is it was suppressed. And still, when it comes up now, essentially it's uncomfortable, and we tend to apply the same logic of distracting ourselves or suppressing it, thinking that that is healthy, thinking that that's the best thing to do. You might have gathered by listening to this that each time these energies are suppressed, they're basically left in the system, ready to function again as our attitude to the flow of life, which inevitably is going to then add an extra load of guilt and blame onto that load in the body, and on it goes. So at some point we might realize, suppressing, which I thought was good. When I say I thought, biologically the body decided this is the best I can do, is actually not that great. And that the way it comes out and is released is by feeling. Now this is quite good in a way, because we can spend our whole life living in our head, where we tend to go when we escape from these feelings that are in the body. So suppressing means, in a way, escaping into the head. So feeling forces us to drop into the body, a place that maybe we haven't hung out for very long in our life. Makes sense, because we drop into the body and it's like, I'm going back up here. But the interesting thing is our connection to Source, which is what we realize when there is the realization, I simply can't be the doer, no one can be the doer, is we realize that we're always connected to Source. What Roger is an extension of Source, that Roger, the movements through Roger, the movements through anyone, is Source living us, Source moving through us, that we can't do anything on our own. Whatever happens is always because Source is moving us. So when there is the realization, I'm not the doer, everything is a happening, we realize our connection to Source. And our connection to Source is only ever realized in the body as a feeling of I am. It can start off intellectually, but at the end of the day, the experiential knowing comes from this looking for ourselves in daily living. And part of the looking is looking at the internal landscape of the body, which means if we're really going to see what's pointed at, we end up at some point having to come into the body. Come into the body where the uncomfortableness is, but also come into the body where the connection to Source happens. Connection to Source really means that impersonal consciousness of Source has linked to a particular body and is functioning through that body as personal consciousness. And the point where impersonal consciousness links to the body is the spiritual heart. And at the point where impersonal consciousness links to the body is the sense I am. Not the thought I am. In the body, there is the sense I exist. It's here that it's recognized and known. So to the extent that we are in our head only, we can't come in contact with this sense. And when I mean sense, it's a feeling, it's an experience, and we'll do a meditation after this that will point at this connection, the sense of I am. But anyway, so coming into the body serves two purposes. We come to feel all the doership energy, which is uncomfortable, which sounds counterintuitive. Why do I want to feel this uncomfortable energy? But the answer is, if we don't feel it, it just stays unprocessed, it stays unregistered. And how do we access this deeply ingrained energy that is sometimes ingrained at the very beginning of our life, or maybe even the notion of identity from another life? So imagine what I'm suggesting is that through our life, the doer gets stronger and stronger as we relate to incidents and events from this perspective of doership. So for a period of time, the doer identity is getting stronger and stronger. And when the body dies, the concept here is that that doership energy doesn't die with the body. The doership energy sort of gets stored. Not a soul, it's just the data, it's just the way that certain events were locked away. And so data of doership from someone else's life, some past life, not my past life, but just a past life, can get inserted into the body at birth. And so these beliefs that are at the core of the human being can be very, very deeply ingrained from very early age, or even from another life that has been lived some other time. So how do we access that deeply into the unconscious? And so there's a suggestion is that start by feeling what is in the conscious realm. And so we can't decide, okay, today at 5 o'clock I'm going to feel these energies, because there might not be anything in the conscious realm at that point in time. But at some point when we're going through life and someone parks their car behind your driveway and you can't get out of the driveway, and you're going to an important appointment or to watch a film, and you see this blame arising. Who parked their car behind? Who parks in front of a driveway like that? You know? And then we might feel this uncomfortableness, which is an attachment to the evening looking like I imagined it was going to look like, which is effectively pleasure, and this situation is pain, not pleasure. And blame towards the person who parked their car there. Blame that relates to them as the doer that could have done it differently, which means no longer seeing life as a creation that is unfolding in a way that is destined for my evening to be one way, the way it's destined, which could be very different from the way I would imagine it to be or like it to be. So in that moment, awareness might land on blame, which is in the conscious. As soon as awareness lands on it, there it is. It's in the conscious. So the suggestion is feel that. Feel that blame. Now, we tend to want to spiritualize life sometimes, or deny things being a certain way because we've learnt that it feels better, or it is a better strategy to deny this. What's being suggested here is throw out any idea of how spiritual enlightenment looks, and be fully with this feeling. And express it. Now, it doesn't mean wait for the driver to come past and come back to his car and hit him on the head with, your broom. But it means go inside, maybe if you have a room that's private and whatever, and completely feel the rage of the blame. Because that's actually stemming not from the fact that someone has parked their car behind you, because if the doership energy wasn't there, someone would say, yeah, not what I like. Actually, the guy is a bit of an ass. But internally there's no suffering. If the identity of doership and attachment has dissolved. So this hatred, this blame is not really coming from the circumstance. It's coming from our attitude to the circumstance, and our attitude to the circumstance can go back a long, long way. So to the extent that we can fully feel this rage without having these ideas, I shouldn't feel this, I can't express this, which are all beliefs that life has put in place previously and hasn't helped us, really, in terms of finding this continuous unbroken happiness. And so this suggestion is try something different. And to the extent that we allow the energy to flower, which means just allow the words to come out as they want to come out, allow the body to move as it needs to move, to hit something or whatever, we might be surprised at the power, the force that's contained in the body that is now coming out as this new form of energy. And imagine that before this happens, you put a video recorder on in the room that's recording you go berserk. Right? And then afterwards, you watch the recording and you see yourself hitting things and swearing, I hate you for what you've done. You've blocked it off, you've ruined my evening. And it's all just coming out. And when you watch it back, it's like you can see all of the doership and attachment in that energy. Now, you don't necessarily need to have a video recorder that records it, because while it's happening simultaneously, there might be something that is almost like a witness to it. Now, this isn't the witness that so much dissolves the suffering. This is just a witness that is interested in this drama, interested in watching this energy. And so whether you record it or you are aware of what's happening at the time, you might be able to see this story of doership. And what can happen is that as the energy is allowed to flow, you might see it shift from hatred towards the person who has parked their car behind your driveway and blocked you in, to it now being about another event from 5 years ago, let's say, with a partner that has done something that you felt disrespected you, for example. And it can turn into words and feelings about this other event from 5 years ago. And so what's happened is we've effectively taken what was in the conscious up on the, let's say, if we use the analogy of an ocean with buoys on the top, the blame in the moment for the car being parked, that's up on the top. It's the buoy that we can see. And the theory is that there's a chain all the way down to the bottom of the ocean where there's an anchor. And all the way up this chain, there are other buoys that are submerged under the water. And each buoy represents doership energy relating to a particular event in history. And down the bottom is this load of doership that is fed by all of these buoys. And probably one major event. You could even say the original error, which is the sense that I have been thrown out of the home of God, let's say, if we want to be really esoteric about it. And we might find ourselves accessing deeper levels of the unconscious by first dealing with what is in the conscious. And when we drop down to the second buoy that's underwater, that essentially has now become the buoy that is on the surface. So now that's in the conscious. And then the energy might finish and that's it. It doesn't go any deeper than that. But that in effect has already shown us, wow, this hatred for what I thought was someone parking behind me turned into another energy from another event in the past. And we might be able to see this link between the two. And then another occasion, another time, the same sort of thing, and we might find it goes back to another event. So whenever we remember, if I tell you, remember an event in the past that is significant, the first thing that comes to your mind is probably something that's unresolved in your unconscious. So as we start becoming more aware of these energies and these dynamics as they relate to doership and attachment to outcomes, we might start getting more and more hints about what events are significant, what our core theme is, whether it's guilt or whether it's blame or whether it's expectation, holding on to things the way we think they need to be. We'll start to see a theme. And once we become familiar with our own theme, then coming in touch with it can become easier and easier. And so sometimes we might feel this uncomfortableness. There's nothing particularly happening in our situation, in the daily living situation. No one's parked their car behind the driveway, and yet we feel this uncomfortableness. And there's an opportunity to feel that, because if we're feeling this uncomfortableness and it's not happening, it's not there because of, it's not triggered by something in the present moment, it already means that's something from the unconscious. And to the extent that we can allow our awareness to land on it, we can start to see what the story is. But sometimes that feeling is very undefined, and we can't really feel much. You just know it's uncomfortable, but I don't know what it is. And so the suggestion is you can start putting words onto the feeling, like anger, hatred, blame, guilt, jealousy, resentment, abandonment. You already might know which category it's in. Like you might say guilt, no, blame. As soon as you put blame on it, you feel it clicks, this is blame. And then once you know it's in the blame category, you might just throw another word on. Is it jealousy? No. Is it resentment? Resentment, and it clicks. And each time it flowers, you can feel the feeling more. And so what starts off as a fairly indistinct feeling can start to flower into a very specific sensation, or a very specific feeling that, once again, we can start to see as doership and allow it, allow the energy to turn into words, to turn into actions, and we'll see a story that we have hidden from ourselves for a long time. We don't want to see that deep down inside, I hate my brother or sister or my mother or father. So we pretend, the body comes up with a way of saying, no, it's okay, that was fine. Yeah. Whereas the energy itself, when it's felt, we can be so totally surprised. The energy itself can sometimes want to can imagine picking up a brick, and if the person was there, and we don't want to see that about ourselves. And the fact is, it's not personal. This is how life has formed us. And if we come to say, I just want to know the truth, I just want to see what is, seeing it doesn't mean that a monster gets unleashed. It's actually the suppressing of it that allows that energy that is there to basically function in life. And we usually have come up with a polished way of it functioning, right, where we have been able to integrate into, but what it does is it disturbs how we feel internally. So to the extent that we start letting it out, if it really leaves the system, then instead of what we think is, no, I don't want to see that because it's going to be problematic in life, it leaves and then it's no longer there to function. So there's a benefit in touching in with these feelings. And if we come to see intellectually the benefit, and then we start practicing and we start seeing what a relief it is to come in touch with these things. It can be uncomfortable, but each time we come in touch with it and flows out, especially, in fact, only if our attitude to life is changed. If we're now on the conscious level seeing life differently, when we feel these energies and they come out, then we realize, oh, this is a story based on the way I saw life in the past. It's a story that's been locked away. And it's not how I see life. I simply don't see the other as the doer. But in this energy that's coming out from many years ago, I completely saw the other as the doer. And then it's allowed to come out as a story that was locked away based on a different way of seeing life. And as that happens, the energy is transmuted. If we don't see life differently, if we still see life as I'm the doer and the other is the doer and I need pleasure, 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 if we feel these energies, what we might feel is the hatred, and it could reinforce the hatred. We feel it again and we say, of course I hate you, look at what you did. So if our attitude to life is now changed, we can start feeling these energies and they get released. And then we find this lightness happening in the body. The body feels much less dense, much less defined. And so this is what is referred to sometimes when descriptions from an awakened point of view is that I can't find myself, I can't locate myself anywhere, I seem to be everywhere. Because the body has essentially become less dense. It's why sometimes we can feel a higher vibrational energy around people that no longer contain these energetic blocks. And at the same time as saying that, like, I can't find myself located anywhere, there's this spaciousness, there's this openness, there's this lack of contraction. On the other hand, we can go, oh, actually, here I am. You know, it's the paradox of both. I am Roger, and Roger is this body living in life, knowing that Roger, this body also, at its core, is awareness and consciousness. That is the essence of Roger. And then at other times, just like breathing, the experience opens up. Not that the experience opening up is freedom or peace. Being Roger, as long as the doership isn't there, is still freedom and peace. But just like breathing, we have in and out, the experience can shift from being Roger the body to at other times when there's nothing to do or not talking, not functioning in life, can just sit quietly and there's a sense of where's Roger? Especially if the body isn't moving and the senses aren't able to pick up the body because you're sort of looking forward, then what we find is this vast open space that is aware of the present moment experience, and the body is not really a big part of the experience. Whereas when the energies are in the body, the thinking is continually happening about how life needs to look, what I need, what the other did, what I did in the past. I shouldn't have done this, you shouldn't have done that. And so the present moment experience is, there's a residual self-image that is continually there, a self-image that is imposed on the present moment, and it feels much more like I am living life and I am here all the time. So this spaciousness that opens up, and then very much through life, we live life as Roger the human being. One isn't at all better than the other, they're just two different ways of experiencing the present moment, and I don't control which one it is, it's just one, sometimes it's one and sometimes it's the other. And this isn't about saying, oh no, I accept whichever one it is. It's the peace is there in both of them. The peace is there in whether the experience of life is one from open witnessing or when we are back functioning as Roger. The peace is there regardless. And so on a deep level where it becomes experiential, these energies need a way out. And so remember, nothing that is ever said is a prescription to someone of something to do. What I've just described is a set of mechanics that could happen. The blame might happen as a result of seeing something that you weren't in control of, seeing the car parked behind your driveway. You weren't in control of the car being there, so you weren't in control of what was seen. That seeing will create a reaction, a thought. In this case, we're talking about it as being a thought of blame. It'll have a feeling to it, so we could feel that blame in the body. And all of that is happening. No one has done blame. Blame has happened. And similarly, the thought, I want to feel this, I want to see what is beneath it, might happen. And we might find ourselves fully allowing the blame to flower. And then it might shift from blame of that situation to blame of some other situation. So all of it is just happening. So I'm not giving any instructions to any individual doer to go and do anything. So at the end of all of the talks, you have nothing to do. That's actually what we can say, is because the talks are new conditioning. How the new conditioning lands is not in our control. It's not in my control as to how it lands in you, and it's not even in your control as to how it lands in you. You might think this is a load of nonsense and be closed off, and it doesn't land at all. You might think it's a load of nonsense and then find yourself in the next week continually thinking about this, which means even though you thought it was a load of nonsense, it still landed. You might think this is fantastic and leave and have no idea about what I said, which might mean it didn't land. Or you think it's great and find that the next week you're thinking about it and it means it did land. It became part of your up-to-date conditioning. So the whole teaching is saying no one has ever done anything in life. There never has been a doer. From the beginning of time to the end of time, there has never been a single doer. The belief in doership is a belief that looks at everything that is always a happening. The functioning of the human being is always just a happening, meaning it's mechanical in a sense. Looks at it and says, that's my doing. That's my doing. So that's the belief in doership, is a belief, an attitude to what is always a happening, saying, that's my doing. So the doer is an attitude, it's a belief. There never is actually someone that is a doer. And so the talks are not telling a doer to do anything, because the talks understand there is no doer. The talks are simply new conditioning that is happening. It'll affect the biological entity that is conditioned by life, that is the biological entity that has always been conditioned by life and has always been just functioning. And then from there, whatever is destined to happen will happen. So to the extent you go, oh, so I have nothing to do. Ramesh said, well, at some point you might just go, well, I'm heading down to the beach. And to go down to the beach with this, I have nothing to do. It's whatever's going to happen is going to happen based on my genes and after. That's very deep realization. It's like, it's a sunny day. Why am I sitting in here? I'm going to the beach. And while you're at the beach, someone might steal your wallet, and blame might come up, and then awareness of the blame might happen, and then interest in this, and so you might close your eyes and really feel the blame, and see the thoughts in your head, and you realize, wow, I didn't have to do anything. In the moment, I felt like going to the beach, which was not my doing. It was a result of my genes and up-to-date conditioning. Roger said something that said, you have nothing to do, and the thought arose. And realized, I'm not living life, I'm being lived. And I come down totally surrendered to the fact I don't have to do anything, and life does the process of investigation. Life does the feeling of the blame. So, see, nothing to do, no practice. There's no practice in life. If we find ourselves practicing meditation, it usually means that there's a practicer. And the practicer is the idea that I am doing meditation, and if I do meditation well, I will get something out of it. So Ramesh used to say, don't go around with an idea that I have to practice meditation. Do meditation if you like it. Meditate when you feel like it. Meditate if you find meditation delivers something that you like in life. Then when you feel like meditating, meditate. And a very advanced meditation practice, and when I say advanced, I don't mean there's an advanced practicer. It means when meditation has essentially dissolved the practicer and meditation is just happening. The meditation is a meditation whereby we're essentially just allowing everything to be as it is. No idea of stopping my thoughts or having certain experiences or the other people in the room cooperating with my meditation in a certain way. Deep meditation is, I feel like just closing my eyes or sitting with your eyes open, very valid meditation as well. In fact, life, when they said life is a meditation, it's an open eye meditation. It's living life, really understanding that I'm being lived in each moment, and at the same time simultaneously witnessing everything that is happening exactly as it happens, which means if anger arises, anger is witnessed as a happening, not as my doing. Anger in its pure form is just a biological reaction. So even if attachment to pleasure has fallen away, anger can still happen, not as blame, but as a biological reaction to the moment. So if someone were to come running up to me and push me back, in that moment, biologically, I could get angry because that's how I'm programmed. And if the anger turns into blame, because anger is pain in the moment, it's not my preference for that situation to happen and for me to have biologically get angry. If that pain in the moment of anger happens, and blame for oneself for getting angry, which is really guilt, feeling guilty, blaming oneself is feeling guilty for getting angry. If that happens, that's the suffering on top of the biological reaction of anger. And if that happens, that suffering is also essentially just a happening based on the genes and up-to-date conditioning, the up-to-date conditioning that is, I'm the doer, the other's the doer, and my happiness is to be found in pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. So the initial anger doesn't have any thoughts, it's just biological. Someone comes and pushes you and you push them, or it could have some thoughts, like you see someone just smash your car window, and biologically, the understanding doesn't mean you said, oh, I'm Zen, someone's just smashed my car window. That equanimity on a biological level is not the point. It's equanimity on an internal, attitudinal level. And so as soon as you see someone with a hammer smash your window, anger can come out. Hey, what are you doing? That is biological. That's not suffering. That's appropriate biological anger according to the circumstance, based on how I'm programmed. At the same time, someone else might see someone breaking their car with a hammer, and instead of anger arising, fear arises. And that fear is a biological reaction, and one is not better than the other. They are just an arising based on the person's conditioning and the circumstance they find themselves in. The suffering comes next, where we blame the other for what they're doing. Usually that happens after the event, horizontally in time. So for the next 10 hours, can you believe that this guy just smashed my window? And then what's more, can you believe I ran away? I was scared, I ran away. I'm such a coward, I should have confronted him. But besides which, he shouldn't have been, like, what's this guy thinking? If that thinking carries on horizontally, and at its core there's this uncomfortableness with the situation, uncomfortableness with the other, and uncomfortableness with oneself, then that's all suffering. That is horizontal, and the biological reaction is vertical in time. That's how we can tend to distinguish between the two. And so the notion can be that, oh, I shouldn't get angry, I shouldn't be sad. But in fact, we can come to see anger and sadness are biological reactions. But because they're usually very personal, because of the circumstance that inspires anger and sadness, which means pain in the moment, and it's personal, then if there's any doership, it's likely that that pain is going to arise simultaneously with suffering. And so our experience of anger and sadness is probably not an experience of pure anger, but it's an experience of anger plus blame, or sadness plus grief. Both the blame and the grief is this sense of uncomfortableness with the situation, whereas the biological anger and the biological sadness are biological and not psychological, not suffering. So, I'm not sure if I was on my way somewhere and I got distracted.
So that blame.
Just for the sake of the recording, if you can.
So if the blame comes up as with anger, but just as a feeling without a story attached to it, then you just, I think I've heard you say before, it could just be as if it's a biological reaction. I mean, is there a reason or a benefit to trying to separate them?
Yeah, there is and there isn't. So what you're pointing at, in the end, we have to treat them both as happenings that I'm not doing. They're both based on my genes and up-to-date conditioning. So why do we separate biological reactions from psychological reactions when they're both happenings? And the reason is so that our intellect can become familiar with the difference between the two. And the difference is on one level they're the same. They're both a happening based on our genes and up-to-date conditioning. But our up-to-date conditioning contains two aspects to it. The working mind and the thinking mind. The thinking mind is the aspect of our up-to-date conditioning that is mistaken about who we are and what life is. That's the thinking mind. I am the doer and attachment to outcomes. And the working mind is the part of our up-to-date conditioning that is functional, understands language, understands mathematics, understands how to drive a car, how to walk, how to eat, how to cook. All of that is conditioning. We know how to drive a car because life has conditioned us. So not all conditioning is problematic. It's only the conditioning that is what we would call the thinking mind, which is this doership and attachment to outcome. That's the conditioning that these teachings and that life dissolves when freedom is destined to be there. So on the one hand, we really have to come to treating both of them, both the biological and the suffering, as happenings. So if I'm blaming, and then I blame myself for blaming, that's suffering on top of the suffering. So there's the primary involvement, which is the blame about a particular situation. That's the primary involvement in the situation. And then if I blame myself for blaming, that's secondary involvement in the primary involvement, or secondary involvement towards the primary involvement. Now, that's just more suffering. Then we might have tertiary involvement in the secondary involvement, right? And so the suffering just carries on and carries on. The bird is back. So to the extent that the primary involvement arises, and we understand it's a happening, then it's just allowed to be there, and we don't have any secondary involvement in it. So why separate it out? It's separating it out so that we can see that the blame is always a story. Even if it feels it's just a feeling in the body, at the bottom of that feeling there's a story. I blame you because you did this, you should have done it different. What you did hurt me, I hate you. That's the story. That's the story in general terms. What is interesting is to come in contact with the story in very specific terms, rather than general terms. So,
They do. They don't doors open? Behind each other? Let's see what he does.
I think he'll work himself out. If
Figure it out. Oh, that's not what we wanted done. Do you? Just do it.
What, I need a broom or something with a long stick, and if you just put it out, put his little legs on it. And then
Couldn't we
just
just
carefully
catch him?
walk him out. I found it out.
What did you do?
Just a way to hold a pole or a broom, and just very gently, and put your head down, don't look in his eye.
What I learned
They
is
get
to
scared.
throw a light tower and then take the whole thing out. Because I catch one time in my backyard, one sick bird. So I called the department, they told me to do, just throw a tower.
I have brothers come down and fire
The other side should allow kind of.
The other
just
side.
yes, that side, yes, if that side.
Yeah, she was so calm.
You might have to go up there, or, you might not.
Yeah,
It's
throw
very
a tower.
slowly.
Do you have a light tower?
Very slowly, very quietly.
Oh.
There you go. Okay, now back up.
Oh, Bertie, I'm sorry.
Use your shawl.
Oh.
Yeah,
He's
gonna knock it.
So do you have a tower?
Use her shawl.
Yes, yes. Throw it to the bird. That's what I learned from that department.
Wide open.
If he goes upstairs, I can
I do it, let me do it. He's better off at it. He's better off at it.
I just open those.
Sorry, Roger.
You're so close, open the door over there. That's how you get it bad. He's gone.
He's gone?
He's gone.
Good.
Okay, now it's that.
That was exciting. So, he wasn't the doer, was he?
no, I was laughing at Zuni's throwing of the towel.
Can I follow up a little bit?
Oh,
on what
yes.
you're saying?
Yeah.
So I was thinking, so when anger comes up, if I, and the concepts come up, and it's just cut off and dropped, then is there, and I know that there was blame there, just, as
Who
no story,
cares?
just it was there. Sometimes I feel like I have to look back and pick everything apart, even when it's just cut off.
Mm-hmm.
But that feels kind of counterproductive. Also,
Yeah.
it feels like more thinking mind business going on.
It can be. You see, with any of these pointers, they serve a purpose for a period of time, and then if we keep laboring them past a certain point, it will become a form of suffering. Yeah. To the extent that the cutting off just happens, then no need to go and investigate. The cutting off tends not to happen when we're not clear on the dynamics. So investigating then starts to show me, oh wow, this blame is doership and attachment to it. Once we've seen it, then blame comes up and it gets cut off by, oh, I'm not the doer, or the other's not the doer, it gets cut off. And if it gets cut off, it means it's understood as being an error. Usually it doesn't get cut off when inside of us we think it's true. And so that's why we keep blaming the other, because there's no part of us that says, this is not true. And the same can be said now that we're talking about feeling. There's, three different ways of approaching, in a sense. One is what you've just described, which is it gets cut off and carry on. There's the other approach that is often pointed at and is very powerful, is to just witness energy, guilt or whatever, just witness it, don't pay any attention to it, and it will just dissolve. So that's not, a concept isn't coming off and cutting it off, it just witness it and it dissolves. Now that's also very illuminating, because in the witnessing, it's not witnessed by the body, it's witnessed by the awareness that we are at our core. And in witnessing, essentially what's being said is, this is not touching what I am. That's what witnessing is really doing. And it shows it up to be not real. It shows the suffering to essentially be not absolute. Witnessing at some point can go too far, in a sense. Not real witnessing, but witnessing when it's a practice. We might think that my job or enlightenment is where there is continuous witnessing of all of these energies as just energy. At some point, once we know that energy is energy and it dissolves and I'm not touched by it, the process might require us to do something different than witnessing. So what I've been talking about today, feeling, is very different to witnessing, because witnessing tends to dissolve the feeling, whereas feeling the feeling enhances it. And so sometimes if someone hears this suggestion to completely feel the feeling and allow it to be, they say, no, that's agreeing with it. That's the very opposite of just witnessing the feeling. And if you just witness it, it dissolves. And this is saying feel it. So to notice that both play their role at certain times, that sometimes witnessing and just allowing it to be there and it dissolves, and at other times it's like, no, I need to know what this is. And we come to realize I need to know what this is, because at some point when we're witnessing and the energy dissolves, then we go out in life and triggers and it comes back up again. And then we drop back in and we witness and it dissolves. And we go back out in life, something triggers and we witness. And at some point it's like hard work, all this witnessing. And maybe that's not what ends up dissolving the root. Maybe witnessing is not the only thing that brings it. Maybe we need to see the root in more detail, and that requires us to really feel what's at the root of these energies. And so at the end, really what's being said is it's not one or the other. It's opening up to the fact that they both serve purposes at different times, not even having to decide which one to do, but rather becoming attuned to just allowing life to unfold. Sometimes witnessing will happen. Other times it'll be, I really feel like I need to feel this and understand it. And other times blame arises, it gets cut off and carry on. No witnessing, no, just living.
Does intuition have anything to do with that organic process, or it's just a made-up thing? Because sometimes I think like intuitively, mentally, I feel like this is the next step I have to take care of myself, to stand up for myself or whatever in any situation. And then either organically or intuitively, it just doesn't come like, no, I don't feel like I should do it. Like I should let it be.
Mm-hmm.
And lately I'm going more with that. I'm not listening to my head. Oh, this is the next step. You have to do this.
Mm-hmm.
So is that intuition? What does intuition mean? And or that is that really that letting go or letting be or surrendering, and are they related or not? I'm just word-wise, I want to come out of confusion about it.
Yeah,
Have a little bit more clarity.
you could. So one of the things that was very significant in my process was at some point, quite early on, once things were understood, intellectually pointed at, it became clear that I have been living life from this list of shoulds and shouldn'ts. And the living life from shoulds and shouldn'ts keeps us disconnected from honoring the biologic, what the body feels like. Because the shoulds and shouldn'ts say, don't worry about anything else. This is how you have to do it. If you do it this way, this is likely to be the outcome. This is the outcome we want. So you should do it this way. And parents have told us this is how you should be. Society has told you how you should be. Essentially because all of society and people are attached to pleasure, thinking it's their happiness. So parents essentially are trying to get their children to deliver them pleasure by coming up with a lot of shoulds and shouldn'ts of how the child is to act. And because this attachment to pleasure is not seen as a dysfunction, we actually think, this is happiness in life, is pleasure, 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 and we try to get it. And so a parent doesn't even necessarily realize that what they're doing is insisting that the child deliver pleasure to them. And society is effectively insisting that other people deliver pleasure instead of recognizing that life is a happening and it's going to unfold as it's destined to happen. And so we have essentially lived our life through these shoulds and shouldn'ts. And to see that and see it's completely linked to our attachment to pleasure, which, remembering this morning's talk, enlightenment is the end of suffering, the cause of suffering is desire, the root of desire is the belief that my happiness is to be found in pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. when we see, actually I've been living my life doing what I should do, working in a job that I really don't like, but I stay there because I should stick with it. Remaining in a relationship because I should do it for the kids' sake, let's say. Or I should do it because if I don't, who knows what my situation is going to end up looking like. And when we live like that, life delivers feedback to us. At some point, the feedback tells us this is not sustainable, this is not living really. And when that becomes obvious enough, then there is the motivation and the rationale to say, no, I'm going to not follow this belief, this should. And a leap of faith is required. And often when that leap of faith is taken, what we find is this great relief, the relief of the gap essentially between what we've been instructed to do from a different level, the body, versus what we have done out of fear or attachment. And when we drop that, what we find is sometimes the thought is, wow, what took me so long? That the outcome, might be a little difficult for a while. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's like not at all what we fear happens. Sometimes it's a little difficult. Sometimes it's not. But either way, we realize, there's a great freedom from the prison that I was living in. And it's an attitudinal freedom, really. And that means coming in contact with what do I feel like doing. So when I realized that what I'm really looking for is the end of internal conflict. That's how it presented to me. And I found my internal conflict was coming home from work tired, lying on the couch, which I love to do. So nice to lie on the couch. And then realizing I've got 5 minutes before I have to get up and have a shower because I've got an appointment in going out with friends or something like that. Which in theory, going out with friends is good. Right? And so I remember I used to play golf with friends. Every Saturday morning a group of friends would go out golf. And the idea, when they'd say, okay, tomorrow golf. Yep, good. Because in theory, I'm going out with my friends. In theory, this is good. But in practice, at the end of golf, I used to not be feeling so great. Either because it's on a Saturday morning and I went to bed really late, woke up early to get to golf, walking around in the sun, not particularly enjoying what I was doing. And yet in my head, it's like golf, great, fun, recreation with my friends. And it's only when we come in and really feel, is this what I feel like doing? Or is this an idea of what I should be doing or what is good? And so going back to the friends thing, what I felt like doing was lying on the couch. And here I was saying, oh no, you should get up, going out is good. And at some point it's like, no, that's my internal conflict. I want to lie on the couch, I'm tired. And so learning how to say no, learning how to cancel, learning how to accept that in cancelling there could be consequences that are painful, not in line with my preferences. However, what I was really looking for was the end of this internal conflict. And so I had to address the internal conflict, and I found that the internal conflict was really this gap between what I thought I should be doing versus what I was really being told on a different level to do. And there was a great freedom in starting to do what I feel like. And now, what I feel like, is that intuition? Now, I would say no, it's not intuition. What I feel like is coming in and dropping out of the shoulds and shouldn'ts that basically don't allow us to consider any other options, don't allow us to value input from any other part of the body. And the body is very intelligent. There's a biological intelligence there. And when we're living from shoulds and shouldn'ts, the biological intelligence basically goes to waste. When the shoulds and shouldn'ts stop, do what you feel like is a feeling that is contributed to by several intelligent faculties of the body. One intelligent faculty of the body, very powerful, is the intellect, the working mind. Now, someone might say, well, this is strange, you just were talking about feeling, and now you're talking about the intellect. The intellect, which is the intellect of the working mind that just looks at the situation and assesses the situation objectively without saying, this is what you should do. That intellect delivers if someone's wired that way. Some people are very wired to be able to calculate things. Other people have less skill at calculating things. But if you find that your intellect is able to assess things on an objective level, then that's one part of the intelligence of the body that informs you in a particular situation. And that intellect can become part of the final feeling. Now, another aspect that becomes part of the final feeling is what I would call intuition, which is not intellect, it's just a feeling of, an unexplained sense of what, like this bus looks like the best bus to catch. So the intellect says that's the best bus to catch based on just assessing the route it takes, the time to get there and all of that. But then you have this feeling that says don't catch that bus. So that could be intellect, that's intuition. So now we still haven't decided what the final feeling is. We've got the input of the working mind, the intellect, which is a very powerful thing that says, looking at it based on the time and the cost of the ticket, that's a good bus, that's the best out of the three options. Then intuition comes in and says, something funny about that bus, don't catch that bus. And then there's another aspect which is like one of the feeling of the body, like you could be tired, you could be hungry. So this bus leaves in 5 minutes, and you don't have any time to get food, and you're starving. So there's, let's say, 3 different intelligences of the body working. And this final feeling is something where you allow the body and all of its intelligence to contribute all of its different inputs, and then a final decision is made. The decision isn't made from your shoulds and shouldn'ts, and it's not made from your intellect. Intellect is a contributing factor. Intuition is a contributing factor. The way the body is feeling on a physical level is a contributing factor. It's all in the mix. And at the end, it's like, I feel like catching that bus, the one in 5 minutes. Or, you don't know what it's going to be. Or, no, I'm not going to catch that bus. I'm going to catch the one that's 5 hours later. The one that's 5 hours later means you have a long wait, 5 hours. But it allows you to eat. And there's this other intuition feeling that says, don't catch that bus. And you don't even really need to do the calculating yourself. You just wait until there is a feeling of what to do next. Understanding that feeling is contributed to by these intelligences of the body. Intuition is just one of them. And depending on how intense each one is, so if that bus in 5 minutes is by far the best option on paper because the ticket is $10 and the other tickets are $300, and it's going to get you in the shortest amount of time, then it might be that your hunger and your intuition that are a certain level, but this other thing is so high up, the final feeling is, let's take the one in 5 minutes. Because your intuition wasn't shouting at you so much, let's say. But if the intuition is shouting, no, don't catch that bus, and this one is by far the best, it's $10 versus $300, the final feeling might be, no, I'm going to get the one for $300. So
the interesting thing is that, as you were saying, lately I'm experiencing that actually the stored feelings in my body talk to me louder than anything else. And I think it is my lack of desire to face drama and conflict anymore. That on the base of what my body feels, almost like a sense of discomfort, that I listen to that more than anything else. It's almost like that is telling me, even though mentally you think you have to have this conversation with this person right now. And then my body starts feeling this really sensation that it doesn't want it. And even though intellectually and even emotionally, I think that's how I take care of myself. I trust that and I let it go because I think I'm actually starting to choose. It's not worth it. I want to be comfortable in my body. It's like it's telling me something. It doesn't matter that logically it seems like this is the right time to have this conversation, but something is telling me that it's going to bring even more conflict and that I can't handle it right now. I'm not just up for it anymore.
Yeah.
So
that means that the body aspect for you at the moment is shouting, in a sense. This is the intelligence of the body, right? Is saying this is the most important factor, because just so we don't get confused, the logic part is not the shoulds and shouldn'ts, right? The logic is just assessing the situation, right? Which is a very valid contributor, but it all depends on which one is based on the intelligence of which one has got the most. They'll have different weights to them, and so in your current situation, based on what you're saying, the intelligence of the body is saying, yeah, that is important, let's say, but what's much more important is to give yourself rest. Yeah. And so this was really a huge shift for me to do what I felt like. Because in practical terms, what it is doing, it's showing that the belief that my happiness is to be found in outcomes is really being seen to be untrue. And we're saying, no, I'm not going to do it the way I think, I've only ever been interested in outcomes, and the outcomes usually are love of the other, let's say, or success. And so things like the body being tired or hungry was overlooked. And to come back and to find a harmony where you are listening to what you feel like is very precious. And at the same time, it's basically cutting off the belief that my happiness looks in that form. Can we pass the microphone?
So, would it be fair to describe being lived as allowing for all those dynamics to reveal themselves? You talked about the balance of those three things. You were listening to your intellect, you were seeing, recognizing the body intelligence, which is something that I feel like I've only recently just even thought about the body having an intelligence. But I'm so interested in how source, source comes through the Rajerness, as I've heard you say. So is it like resting and allowing for these elements to reveal themselves, and that is the being lived?
Yeah, so actually those different urges, to me, that's source. So source creates the tiredness, let's say, if there's tiredness in the body. And what I mean by the biological intelligence that says, I'm tired, I need to rest. Source, that is source, that tiredness is source. And the intuition that says, no, don't rest, it's important for you to meet this person. Let's say that's what your intuition in that moment, that is source. functioning through me, that urge. And the intellect says, I'm not talking about the thinking mind, but the working mind intellect says, well, you could meet them tomorrow at 8 o'clock. They said they were available at 8 o'clock. So that's source coming through. And then how source finally looks is when all of the three aspects of source come together, and it creates a final feeling that says, I have no investment in what the final instruction is. I just follow it. And the final instruction is no rest now, let's say. Or the final instruction is no, have the meeting now. I never know what it is. I just know that as long as we're attuned to what we feel like doing, which is not selfish necessarily, because it's got all sorts of inputs in it that says, no, what you feel like doing is helping someone who's in need, even though you might be tired, let's say. The final feeling tells you what to do next, and that is source functioning through me. And so how I came to see it really is that in each moment, God is giving me instruction, and the instruction is the feeling of what to do. And to the extent that there is no feeling of what to do in that moment, the instruction I'm being given is no decision to be made. Do nothing. So if someone's saying, can you come and give a talk at such and such a time, I want to find my instruction, which is always to go to the feeling. And the feeling is, I don't know what the feeling's going, but let's say the feeling says yes, then that's my instruction in that moment. To the extent that the feeling is yes, no, not sure, then my instruction is not sure, or means you haven't been given the instruction, or the instruction is to wait until such time. Might be days go past, and the head might be saying, oh, they asked you 5 days ago, and they asked if you could give them a response in 5 days. Today's 5 days, and I don't have a response still. And I should give them a response. Could come up, I should give them a response, but I don't have a response. So at that point, the feeling might be, just write an email and say, I can't answer the question at the moment. The feeling might actually be, don't give a response. There isn't. And in hindsight, we might say, I could have, theoretically could have, we won't really believe it, but we might realize, that was not so ideal. I could have written an email that said, I can't give you a response. It's polite to do that. To the extent I didn't do it, I see it as, my genes and up-to-date conditioning, the circumstance, didn't create the thought for me to write an email that says, I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for you. And the person might then write back and say, it's a bit rude of you not to have responded to my thing. And I could see, it's true. I agree, yeah, it's rude. I apologize. I agree with you, it was rude. That's pain in the moment. I don't like, obviously to have been rude, to be told that it was rude. But I can look at it objectively and say, yes, it's true, it's rude. But deep down, what we know is that in each moment I'm doing what I feel like, which now I've assessed compared to the old way of doing what I should and I shouldn't. It's a much more, we could consistently live life from shoulds and shouldn'ts. If I'm going to choose where to consistently live life from, I've made my choice based on what it delivers in life. And my choice is to, in each moment, do what I feel like, which I now feel as God giving me instruction in each moment in a way that is in line with, or in flow with life. If I'm doing things from what I should or shouldn't, that's still God giving me instruction. Source doesn't only function through those three intelligent. Source is also functioning through, you should do this, you shouldn't do that. It's just that, so in each moment, Source is always giving us instruction. So everyone is always being lived. The thing is that most of the time when we're living from shoulds and shouldn'ts, there isn't an awareness that everything is a happening. So it's still Source living us, but it's source living us in such a way that we feel disconnected, we feel in opposition to life, and that's part of the story. So my recommendation, Ramesh, if asked the question, which he thought was a very good question, so given everything is predetermined in life, down to the smallest detail, that bird that came in was destined to come in. The way it came in, it was destined to hit the windows. How it hit the windows, it was destined to go behind the thing, and eventually destined to fly out. Zuni was destined to throw the scarf at it as though it was a poisonous snake. And all of that was destined to happen, and me finding it humorous. Where were we? If life is completely predetermined, how do I live my life in practical terms? And he said, look, very simple, good question. In each moment, do exactly what you think or feel to do. Now, at the end of this discussion, I'm saying, well, we're all going to act exactly as we're destined to act, either from what we think we should do or shouldn't do, or from what we feel like doing. The suggestion is that when I started doing what I feel like doing, I realized that was instruction from God in such a way that I found myself always in flow with life. When I was doing what I think I should do, it was also instruction in God, but instruction from God in such a way that there wasn't a flow with life. So Ramesh is asked, how do I live my life if it's completely predetermined? He says, look, simple, in each moment do exactly what you think or feel to do. He hasn't actually given anyone any instruction. He's just described how all of life has always been happening from the beginning of time. Yeah. Right? Everyone in any moment is doing what they think or feel to do. So my suggestion is, do in any moment what you think or feel to do. Which is not really telling anyone anything new. But if you find yourself doing what you feel like doing, which includes the intellect aspect in that, it doesn't mean you're going to start being completely irresponsible. And I describe that as life in flow from my own experience. But still, I'm not saying you should function from what you feel like doing, because I understand that someone in any moment can only function one way, the way that they are designed to function, the way they are destined to function. So for me to say you should live like this is effectively an obstruction over the understanding that I don't know how anyone should live in any moment. I just know that in any moment life is going to be lived one way or the other. Ramesh would also add, in each moment do exactly what you think or feel to do, then sit back, knowing that the outcome is not in your control, knowing that what you did was what was destined, the outcome also what was destined. So sit back, relax, with no expectations in the future, no regrets in the past, and no complaints in the present moment. Once again, if we listen to that from a doership point of view, and say, well, he's telling me what to do, he's telling me how I should live life. Do in each moment whatever you think or feel to do, then sit back, relax with no regrets in the past, no expectations in the future, no complaints in the present. What he's actually saying is that way of living, if it happens, is happy living. So once again, not a prescription of what to do, but more a description of what might happen.
Do we have a freedom in choosing that? Or we don't even have a freedom in choosing that?
Okay, so you asked, do we have a freedom in choosing that, or don't we have the freedom in choosing how we're going to live, right? Or how we're going to function?
Choosing forgiveness over blame, or realizing that it was an error, and or there is no error, or it's all the way it's supposed to be, or choosing between I want peace right this moment, and I choose to choose that in every coming moment. No, I can do it or not, I don't know, but that is my choice. Is that
Predetermined.
that is even predetermined?
Yes. And so, but it's a very good topic to not, we could just say even that is predetermined, everything is predetermined. So your attitude to life is also not your choice. Your attitude to life in any moment is a happening, not your doing. A happening because your attitude is based on your genes and up-to-date conditioning. When your up-to-date conditioning is a certain way, the attitude is of doership and attachment based on the conditioning. And when your conditioning changes, that's when your attitude can be different. So who determines your genes and up-to-date conditioning? Not you. Life determines your... So it's life forces you to change depending on how it changes you. Now the question is, so is there choice? And this is an interesting topic. Let's see how much time we have to talk about an interesting topic. Is there choice? Yes, there is choice. When you just put that up to what I just said, you go, hang on a sec. You just said that life forces us to be a certain way, and life brings about the changes. And so any decisions that are made decisions made according to how I am in that moment, based on my genes and up-to-date conditioning. And so that decision is not my choice. So this comes down to definitions, which is, we have to be very careful with definitions. Definitions, it might sound like this is about transformation, and spirituality definitions are about English language or grammar. But freedom is really freedom from beliefs. And beliefs are thoughts, and how we see life is based on labels and language. We see things based on our comprehension, which is really all language and words. And we were having a conversation, you were pointing out that all of society is continually reinforcing the idea of doership. I am going for a walk, you did this, you should... So language reinforces the belief of doership. And when we look at the English language, so many words presuppose, in the definition of the word, a doer. It's included. So choice really means my choice when we use the word choice. It's not explicit, but it's implied. Choice, well, obviously, it must be my choice. Thought or thinking. Thinking, my thinking. In these teachings and many non-dual teachings, they actually say, no, everything's a happening, not your doing. Thinking happens as a result of your genes and up-to-date conditioning, that it's a mechanical process as a result of something seen, heard, touched, tasted. Not your thinking, but thinking happening. Eating happens. Walking happens. And so at some point we start speaking in passive terms. We say, it doesn't make sense for me to say, I went for a walk, or I am walking, because that sort of implies doership. What we then can for a while start saying, walking is happening, or eating is happening, talking is happening. And it can be a little annoying when we hear this. But to the extent we understand this person is going through the process, and they're at the point in the process where they're seeing, actually everything is happening, and to solidify that understanding, the intellect starts saying, well, stop saying, I am doing this, and start speaking in passive terms. You know? Thinking is happening. And at some point, once that is become very ingrained as to what the process is, what life is, that's all happening, then we can start introducing the I am talking back, but deep down, so the words now don't reflect how I see what's really happening on a dynamic level. But I can still talk in a way that is functional. Shall we go for a walk? And it doesn't imply that I have a misunderstanding about life being a happening. So now let's get on to choice. Choice as a word implies control and my choice. And the teachings are saying we have no control, but there is choice. But choice, as it's defined in the teaching, isn't my choice, but it's referring to the point where a decision is made as a happening. And so if we say there's no choice, it's not very accurate. What is meant when people go around, say in spiritual teachings even, there is no choice. What they're pointing at is the fact that everything is happening, or it's all predetermined. There is no one to choose. Right? So how can there be choice if there's no chooser? That's what's being pointed at. But at some point, you go, no, that's not really accurate. If there needs to be clarity about life. If we're given a menu and there's 10 items on it, the life experience is that there are 10 options, and at some point, based on the circumstance, which in this case is the 10 options, and how you're feeling, your preferences in that moment, will pick one of the 10 options. That is a decision or choice. One of 10 options is picked. So there is a choice between the 10. When we look at the mechanics, we find that choice is based on someone's genes and up-to-date conditioning that they're not in control of, based on the circumstance they find themselves, including how hungry they are and what sort of hunger they have and what options are on the menu. And so a choice is made, but we realize not my choice, but a choice in the moment. And then once a choice is made, we realize that the outcome of the choice, not in my control. So I choose orange juice. The waiter comes, I say, I'll have an orange juice, please. Understanding that I couldn't have chosen anything different than orange juice. Technically, I could have chosen apple juice, but the fact I chose orange juice meant that in that moment, based on my genes and up-to-date conditioning, the final choice, which was a happening, was orange juice. I asked the waiter for orange juice. He goes away, comes back 3 minutes later and says, I'm very sorry, there's no orange juice. So the outcome, not in my control. Or he comes back with my orange juice. There's your orange juice, sir. I taste it and it's terribly sour. The outcome, not in my control. Or I get the orange juice, I taste it and it's brilliant. The outcome, never in my control. Sometimes I get what I want, sometimes I don't get what I want. Ramesh would say, and sometimes you get far more than you want, or far less. And so, yes, when we then look at it clearly and we see there is no one, that what no one means, there is no doer, no chooser that is independent. This idea that we tend to start off with in life, that I am an independent chooser. So that falls away, but then we say, but there is choice in life. I can't go around saying, I have no choice, because we spend our whole day making choices. But they're not my choice. But there is choice happening. And so this leads on to free will. Do we have free will? So here, see if you can wrap your head around this. Everything in life is completely predetermined from the beginning of time to the end of time, a creation of source, that the leaf blowing in the wind is all the experience created to be exactly the way, an arising in consciousness. Right? The questions asked, the bird coming in, all a creation destined to unfold exactly as it unfolds. A leaf falls off the tree at exactly the time it's destined to fall off, falls to the ground, following the path, it falls to the ground, and a thought about the leaf falling to the ground arises as it's destined to arise. Completely predetermined. Do we have free will? The obvious surface answer is no, we have no free will, everything is predetermined. And so when I went to see Ramesh, before really hearing his teachings, the process that had happened before demonstrated to me such that I had deep conviction and recognition that everything is happening, that everything is predetermined to unfold, not according to my will. And so when he was talking about everything being predetermined, I was sitting back relaxed, no argument in my head, thinking, fantastic. Tick, tick, tick. Yeah, great. And then he said, oh, and we have complete free will in the moment to do exactly what you think or feel to do. What? What are you talking about? So, but Ramesh, we don't have free will. Everything we do is based on our genes and up-to-date conditioning, or it's a happening, it's a creation of source. Roger, you have complete free will in the moment to do exactly what you think or feel to do. No. But free will is the opposite of predetermination. Roger, everything is completely predetermined from the beginning of time to the end of time. And you have complete free will in the moment to do exactly what you think or feel to do. I just couldn't get my head around it. I can't agree with you. At best, I said, we have apparent free will. And Ramesh, it came close to being acceptable for him, but not really. He sort of was, okay. It wasn't really his point that he was making. His point was, which I didn't see at the time because I had this definition of free will that I was holding on to without realizing it, a definition of me as a separate doer having free will. Ramesh was pointing out that there is a free will, what you can call free will, but it's not the free will that we generally call free will. It's not the free will of an individual doer. That, his whole teaching is saying, there is no doer, so there can't be free will of a doer because there is no doer. But then he's pointing out, in this moment, isn't it true that there is the feeling that you can do whatever you feel like? You have the feeling that you can stand up or sit down, that you could raise your hand or not. And so it's that feeling in the moment that Ramesh was referring to as your free will. And I was stuck on my definition of free will as that of a doer, like choice. And when I realized that that was the only thing that was preventing me from seeing the experience as it was, which is with the sense of free will, was my definition. And so once my definition changed, and I realized free will is not talking about the fact that I am an independent chooser, but rather that there is the undeniable freedom feeling in the moment. And that's a gift from God. That I don't want that sense of free will to be removed, otherwise I would feel like a robot, forced to do things in the moment where I don't feel like, I know that in theory that's the case. I am a biological robot. Everyone is a biological robot doing exactly what they're destined to do. But we now have this freedom of free will, the sense of free will, that makes it quite acceptable, which makes the life experience a wonderful experience to be able to watch it and at the same time feel free. And how life unfolds, how the predetermined story of life unfolds, is by each human being making choice in each moment. That's the unfolding of the story of life. And what choice is made is predetermined already. But what is predetermined happens in practice through us choosing. And when we look at it, we can then realize, my free will, which is the choice that is made in the moment, which we really know is God's will. So I say, my free will and God's will are not two. So in each moment, do exactly what you think or feel to do, knowing that that's God's will. And from that point of view, say, so I have nothing to fear of God. Whatever I do is God's will. Whatever the other does is God's will. So society will still judge me and punish me for what happens through me. So reward me for those actions that are positive, punish me for those actions that are negative. But God will never judge me. How can He judge me? Firstly, we have to find this God that will judge me, which when we really look at is a concept of a God that has been perpetuated through time. There is no God sitting on a cloud. There is no God that is looking in at what I'm doing. There is no God that is controlling me like a puppet on a string. These are all ideas of God. So when we stop blaming the other, we might find ourselves blaming God for what's happening. If everything is God's will, well, I won't blame the other, but I'll blame God, that cruel, maniacal God. It's a concept. Where is this God that we're blaming? If we come to see that life is basically consciousness at rest, exploding into manifestation, becoming the creation. So God, which is consciousness at rest, has exploded into, has become the whole story of time. So God has become you and me and everyone else. God has become the victim and the perpetrator. God has become the oceans and the mountains, the good deeds and the bad deeds, the people to whom the good deeds and bad deeds are done. So when this is recognized, the idea of blaming a God that doesn't exist, our concept of God falls away. And we find that really we live life even when something tragic happens, when the attachment to outcomes has been seen as an error, when the doership has been seen as an error, when the connection to our inner being is grounded into. And we realize that that inner being is an extension of Source, that we are not separate from Source. Then circumstance is simply seen to be pleasure or pain and destiny, and the internal resistance to that, meaning the internal resistance towards a God, towards another, just isn't there. Surprisingly, who knows? How is it that we can find ourselves in tragic situations where someone we love dies tragically, or we end up in an accident where our bodily function is not what it used to be? How can it be that we can find ourselves in this situation and still there is this relationship to life that sees it as destiny unfolding without any hatred towards the other or towards God? The answer must be because what we are at our core is known by ourself. So we know what we are being what we are, and that what we are at our core truly isn't something that is born and dies, isn't something that is attacked, added to or subtracted to from what happens in the flow of life. To the extent that we are grounded in that being, that's what explains why life can unfold in tragic ways sometimes, and yet the peace, and which is really the lack of blame and hatred, can be there. That's what explains why the peace can be there, because of what our true nature happens to be.
So this is really the dream.
All of life is a creation in consciousness, which is referred to as a dream, because a dream at night, and there's a very good reason why dreams have been included here, so that we have a frame of reference, to hopefully be able to see the life experience as an arising in consciousness, which is what a dream is. A dream is, it spontaneously arises in the consciousness of what we could call the dreamer. And a whole universe, a whole world springs into existence as an experience in consciousness. And when there is awareness of the dream appears real. The character in the dream appears to be the doer, in control of everything it thinks, says, does. It sees the other as the doer, in control of everything they think, feel, and do. It experiences, the character in the dream experiences pleasure and pain, will feel hatred or blame, guilt towards itself and the other. And all of that is an error about what the dream fundamentally is. If in the dream the character realizes, this is a dream, I am a character in the dream, everything that is happening in the dream is not my doing, is a happening according to the will of Source, the source of the dream. And what is functioning through me, that is seeing the dream from the perspective of this character, is the source, is the consciousness of the dreamer. So what I really am as the character, at my essence, is not a separate, independent object or vulnerable entity. What I am at my essence is the consciousness of the dreamer, which is having the dream. And that whatever happens in the dream doesn't touch the dreamer. The dream is an illusion, an arising in consciousness, an experience, there to be experienced. And when it's all said and done, the dream collapses into nothing. It's sprung out of nothing, collapses into nothing. Therefore, nothing ever happened. So Ramana's great conclusion, there is no creation, there is no dissolution, nothing ever happened. Essentially saying the creation is like a dream. So on appearance level there isn't a creation. It comes out of nothing and it's all there. A whole lot of stuff happens and then it dissolves back into nothing. So essentially you start with nothing, you end with nothing, nothing happened. So life is a dream.
This nothingness you think you are in choice, kind of like in my dreams when I'm flying on top of a monster bird all over the mountains. I am doing it, but it is not really real. That is where I think I have choice and I'm doing it and I'm enjoying it.
Yes, in fact it's just an experience happening. Yeah.
Wow.
And just because you brought it up, I'm sure that you mentioned forgiveness and choice. Sounds Course in Miracles-ish, yeah? So just and I have a lot of respect for Course in Miracles. It was for a year or so, it was part of what I engaged in. And it delivered a whole lot of insight. I mean, I have to say that to me, A Course in Miracles just said everything is happening according to God's will. And that what you are God, and you are real, everything that's happening is changing and therefore it's not real. The real is not affected by the unreal. At the beginning, therein lies the peace of God. To see the unreal as unreal, to know the real as real, and once that's clear, the peace of Source essentially stems from that recognition. In this teaching, we can take some of the concepts further, like the concept of forgiveness. When this is deeply understood, we realize forgiveness doesn't have a place because there is nothing to forgive. There is no one that has ever done anything. So forgiveness actually still implies that, well, there is someone who has done something and I forgive you for it. Deeper realization is there is no one to forgive. And to demonstrate why a teaching is just a teaching and it does what it needs at a certain point. There are teachings, and in particular, not in many places, in many teachings, in Course in Miracles as well, it says, what happens in life, you are not in control of. Right? What you are in control of is your attitude to life. That's one of the lessons. It's important it does that. It says that what happens in the flow of life, you're not in control of, but your attitude, because it creates a distinction where it's distinguishing the difference between the flow of life and your attitude to the flow of life. Right? It's a teaching, it's helping, it's doing what is necessary. Then you go down another 100 lessons or something. It says, even your attitude to life, you are not in control of. The same set of teachings effectively contradicts itself, but it's a useful, it's not a mistake, it's what's required. What good timing. Thank you.